works to make it easy to plan for tomorrow today. More at schwab.com/plan.
This is 94.9 KUOW, Seattle's NPR news station. It's 12:06. Time for KUOW's Week in Review.
Welcome Friday. Welcome to the Week in Review, and we come together as acquaintances
and figure out what happened this week and what it all means. I'm Bill Radke. I had a pretty good idea who my panelists were going to be today, and now I'm positive because I have visual confirmation because I can see them on my screen, and so can you. If you go to YouTube or Facebook, you just search KUOW Public Radio. I see Publicola publisher and editor Erica C Barnett. Hey, Erica.
Hey, Bill. Great to be here.
Good to see you, as always. I just found out I can't take my kids to a guest ranch in British Columbia as I was planning because the border won't open this month. So if you want to hang out, I'll be around.
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah, okay.
No plans.
Good, excellent. Seattle City Council Insight founder and writer Kevin Schofield. Hey, Kevin.
Hey there. How you doing, Bill?
Are you wearing a fleece?
No, I'm wearing a sweatshirt.
A sweatshirt.
I got a hoodie on. Yeah.
Because if you had told me I was wearing a fleece a moment ago, I what do? I doffed it in order so you could see my KUOW t-shirt. But if you'd have told me in the heat dome that I was going to be wearing a hoodie or a fleece very, very soon, I'd have been happily surprised.
Well, the marine layer is going to burn off shortly, and I'm sure I'll be not wearing this in a little while. But it's a little chilly this morning.
Well, okay, so go to YouTube and Facebook, and you will see Kevin not wearing a hoodie as soon as it happens. Also, we have Pulitzer Prize-winning author of the Wild West newsletter on Substack, Eli Sanders. Good to see you.
Good to see you, Bill.
Did you hear the news? If you're listening live here on Friday at noon, our newscaster just reported that the lottery winner has been named. This is for $1 million for getting a vaccine dose, a COVID vaccine dose, and it's a 20-something motorcycle mechanic in South King County who says he didn't even know about the lottery until he got the call, which is not exactly what I wanted to hear. Kind of wanted
You're
to.
You're not
be
happy for him, Bill?
Well, I'm not. I would have been happier if it was you, Eli. I'll be honest. But. You kind of want to think that it's someone who was vaccine hesitant, but they heard about the lottery and that caused them to save themselves and their family. But anyway, yeah. But he's richer.
Okay, but glass half full, Bill. He didn't know about the lottery, so he didn't have to be bribed to get his vaccine. He just got it out of his own sense of self-protection and altruism.
I like that. That's a nice way to think of it. Okay, let's get at the news of the week, shall we? Unfortunately, you may find some glass half full here. I don't know, Eli, but to me, it's unfortunate that we've got to begin with the dry and the burning. This week, Governor Inslee declared a drought emergency for most of Washington state.
This is a crux moment for the state of Washington, and I'm hopeful that while we're suffering through this tough summer, we are equally dedicated to fighting climate change.
Meanwhile, the state public lands commissioner, Hilary Franz, projected.
We are now projecting that every single week we are going to see increasing catastrophic wildfires on our landscape. We have currently right now 5 significant ones that have just broken out over the last 7 days.
Okay, let's start with the Drought Declaration. Kevin, what does that entail, and is Greater Seattle included?
Well, so Greater Seattle is not included in this. It turns out that Seattle Public Utilities have done a pretty good job of managing our water supply with their reservoirs and up in the mountains. So it's hard for us to remember right now, but we actually had a wetter, snowier winter than we usually have. In this year. And the SP did a good job of filling up those reservoirs. So they got about 40 billion gallons sitting up there in the reservoirs right now. That's over 200 days worth. So that's going to get us into the rainy season in the fall. That doesn't mean we should go out and do stupid things, because we don't know exactly when the rainy season is going to start. We don't know how much rain and snow we're going to get in the mountains over the winter, right? So we should all be prudent about this.
That you're thinking, what's a stupid thing that you're thinking of?
Going out and just wasting a lot of water, having everybody say, oh yeah, we should all be watering our lawns right now. We should not be watering our lawns right now. Right.
Or
And,
massive
you know,
fireworks display in a dry
yeah.
forest to celebrate how much water we have.
Yeah.
Gender
yeah.
reveal party with
Yeah.
explosives. Yeah.
But there's going to be some serious conservation measures going into place in the rest of the state. And I also think, just being a good neighbor, we should not be showy about the fact that we have plenty of water when the rest of the state really does not, and is going to have to do some serious things to get through the rest of the summer.
Again, how would we be showy to the rest of the state? That would be us wasting water again.
Watering lawns,
Fountains.
Filling up that swimming pool, that little swimming pool in your backyard for the kids to run around in. And if we get another big heat spell, we may change our minds about some of those things, right? And we should definitely be thinking about things that the city and the county can be doing as a whole, so we can share some of those with the appropriate COVID protections around those things. But just personally wasting a lot of water is not going to be a good thing for us to do right now.
Okay, Erica C, any thoughts on what city and county could be doing, and then what appears to be the new normal for summers?
Sure. I mean, I think obviously Seattle is impacted by the smoke that happens every summer. I think, last year, one thing that we observed in the middle of COVID is that the city failed to prepare for any sort of smoke response for people who are living outdoors, and there are thousands of them. And it was kind of like a lot of the city's response to emergencies that came up during the COVID emergency and during the homelessness emergency. It was pretty last minute, and it was in collaboration with King County. They created one big smoke shelter in Soto. Meanwhile, their policy on things like libraries and community centers was, it's too unsafe for people to be inside at all during COVID. So what would be good to see, and what I guess we will see this summer, is that the city has done a little thinking ahead in terms of how to actually help people who have to live outside because we don't provide housing for them get through at least the emergency of smoke. And then, of course, there's stuff that we can all be doing, housed folks can be doing personally to prepare ourselves, making sure you have those N95 masks, which, are now possible to get again, making sure that you have fans that circulate air out, closing your windows. And if possible, I mean, in my case, I'm going to be getting out of town for a little bit of what's expected to be the smoke season in August. But, as we saw next year, it can go well into September. So just kind of mentally preparing yourself as well for the likely fact that this is going to be a recurring thing every single year.
Eli, what are your notes on prepping and reacting to summertime these days?
Well, I think Erica gave a good rundown of countermeasures, I guess, you can take in your own home. And I'd just add that what we're hearing from elected officials, from reporters on the climate beat, is that this is all tied in terms of the increasing frequency and intensity of dry spells in the summer and fires and the heat dome that we recently experienced. All of it is tied to climate change. And if you are upset about the smoke or the heat, then one way to channel your frustration is into trying to do what you can to address climate change. And there's been a lot of writing lately about, okay, but what can any one person do? And there's a good newsletter on Substack. A fellow Substacker writes a newsletter called Heated. Emily Aiken, I believe is her name. And her last newsletter addressed this. What can you do? And her answer was everything. And she gives you some ideas. So you could check that out if you want to.
Okay, Heated by Emily Aiken. Kevin, I know, will not be having ostentatious water displays. But Kevin, what about... is there a financial issue here for the state of Washington?
I wouldn't.
Go ahead.
I wouldn't want to be Hilary Franz. I wouldn't want to be Hilary Franz right now, who has to sort of manage this problem for the state and fight forest fires. And we know this is going to be a seasonal issue every year, and the state tries to budget for it. But it's expensive to have all the equipment and resources and people available to go fight fires when they start. And so the state has to predict, when is the fire season going to start and when is it going to end, and what resources do we have to have available during that time. And this year, the fire season and the heat wave season started very early. and caught them a little bit off guard at the beginning. I think they may be starting to get a little caught up now. And we don't know how late it's going to go into the fall, right? So it's a big question mark in the state budget as to, how much should they budget for this every year? And, and especially for something that is seasonal, right? These aren't resources that they have all year round. They need to go provision them at a certain point in the year. And they need, in some cases, for personnel that they're borrowing from other departments, they need to give them back to other departments that need those people, for winter road and, and other maintenance during the winter at some point in the fall too. So there's lots of interdependencies that just make it a hard and expensive logistical problem for the state to manage.
Erica C, what do you know about how the state's paying for or not paying for, heat, smoke, fire, drought preparation?
Yeah, well, the legislature passed new funding this year that's going to help in the firefighting response, which, unfortunately is a big part of how we deal with wildfires. And so that will help in the future. It's for future years, so I don't know to what extent it's going to be able to come into play this year. But Hilary Franz, the Department of Natural Resources Director, has said that they really need a lot of assistance in financial assistance to make it possible to do controlled burns, clearing out forest floors, or sweeping them, as our former president would have suggested, is actually quite expensive and labor intensive. So, that sort of preparatory work still needs funding. But, ultimately, this all comes down to climate change. And part of our response to that is going to have to be, preparing forests and building in resilience and also, frankly, not building exurban communities, not expanding the suburbs any further into our forests, because when we don't, this is my hobby horse, when we don't have density in cities, that's where people can afford to live. And when you have that, when you have people living in those wildfire areas, you see a lot of disaster and death.
Erica raised a bunch of good points about the the kinds of work that the state needs to do more of in managing forests, so we're not just entirely reliant on fighting fires once they show up. But it's also important to remember that it's not just the state, right? A lot of our forest is privately owned by Weyerhaeusen or other forestry companies, and then a lot is federal forest, right? So it's not like the state can just decide to solve this problem on their own. We actually need to partner with private industry and with the federal government for a larger solution. And they're definitely not all on the same page on this.
Good point. Our biggest fires right now, 34,000 acres are on the Colville Reservation. Between Wenatchee and Kashmir, there's a fire that burned about 11,000. Investigators got a warrant there to search a home. I don't know if that means they suspect arson, but we'll hear more about that. No evacuation orders yet in Washington. A lot of bigger fires in BC and a giant one in South Central Oregon. And finally, our state climatologist says there's no sign of any more monster heat waves, no more heat domes coming. But he also doesn't see much rain. Okay, this is the Week in Review on KUOW and online on YouTube and Facebook. I'm Bill Radke, and I'm with Erica C Barnett, Kevin Schofield, and Eli Sanders, running down the big news of the week for you. And your ballots dropped this week, and everybody wants to know whether local voters want change, and if so, what kind. Erica C, what do we know about how this election's looking?
Well, the conventional wisdom right now, as I'm sure you know, Bill, is that Bruce Harrell is going to go through. Bruce Harrell, former city council member and mayor for, I think, less than a week when Ed Murray resigned. And with
top fundraiser so far?
No, he's not the top fundraiser. Well, he's, there's a cap on fundraising. And so it gets complicated because there are independent expenditure groups that are coming into play. But Andrew Grant Houston, who's, one of the other candidates, has actually raised more money faster than a lot of the kind of front running candidates. But Harrell is really well known. I think he's a really good campaigner, and he's well regarded by a lot of people. And Lorena Gonzalez, current city council president, is also viewed as a front runner. And, but we'll see. There's a lot of strong candidates in this race, which I think is different than, some other years, particularly where you've had an incumbent suppressing the number of people who are going to run. This is an open seat. And so anything could happen. I mean, I would say my bet is on Bruce and Lorena making it out, but Colleen Echohawk, former head of the Chief Seattle Club, is also making a big push. And we'll see. You know, I'm really bad at predicting these things, and I you know, I would say I sometimes discount the impact of television commercials. And you know, all the candidates are hitting the airwaves with ads this week and in recent weeks. So that's my bet, but I'm often wrong. So what do other folks think?
I think in
Kevin
general,
Schofield, do you have any Seattle City Council insight?
I see what you did there. I think, Erica stated pretty well the conventional wisdom on the mayor's race, that Harold is the front runner. And then for the second person to get through the primary, it could be Gonzalez, it could be Justin Farrell, it could be Colleen Echohawk. Those are probably, and it could be Andrew, Grant Houston. Those are kind of the four other big names that seem to be battling it out for the second one. But we're supposed to, maybe as soon as this afternoon, get a couple of public polls that have been fielded recently. The results may drop. So, we may know more very shortly in the next few hours, even about whether the conventional wisdom is still holding up right now. I think, there's another interesting open seat race, which is one of the city council races right now. And there are three sort of leading candidates for that. Nikita Oliver, Brianna Thomas, and Sarah Nelson. And, I honestly have no idea which of the two of them are going to make it through. There are a bunch of other candidates too that I'm sorry, what was that?
That's a citywide position.
That is a citywide city council position. So it's not district based. So there's going to be a lot of people voting, and a very diverse set of people voting, and we'll see what happens with the campaigning there.
Wow. I have predictions on that, but Kevin, we can talk about them off air because
I have no predictions.
Okay. I have a pretty strong prediction on that one.
But you don't want to share it with us, Eric?
Oh boy,
you're not good at it.
That's the thing. I always say things publicly, and then I'm embarrassed later. So I'm going to keep that one to myself. But I do think on the polling, going back to the mayor's race, I have heard polling that suggests those top two, Bruce and Lorena, are looking pretty strong. The poll you're talking about, or at least one of them that's coming out this afternoon, is from Northwest Progressive Institute, and it was an online SurveyMonkey poll. I'm not sure exactly how they targeted it, but I was sent it and I took it. And I described it as kind of an odd poll in today's Morning Fizz on Publicola for some of the more specific, detailed questions it asked. But
I got that one too, but I've actually heard that there's another one that's been fielded this past week. So
we're probably talking about the same one. Drop.
Okay, well, we'll have a show devoted to predicting when polls will come out. Eli Sanders, I'm watching you, thinking, you used to be at The Stranger, which a lot of people in Seattle over time have had right with them as they were voting. They would have The Stranger endorsements, but that's also changed now.
Yeah, The Stranger stopped printing when the pandemic hit and hasn't restarted, and as far as I know, doesn't have any plans to restart. So one thing I'm curious about, in the discussion of whose endorsements matter most, is whether that will have any effect on the impact of The Stranger's endorsements. My bet is no. I think they will be as influential as they've always been. When I was there, you could always see from the online analytics that the endorsements got a tremendous amount of traffic, and the paper would, release at the end of election season some data on how many people had clicked on the endorsements, and it was always a huge percentage of the electorate. And so if The Stranger's endorsements appear to be less influential than in the past, one place to look might be the fact that people can't grab a paper copy and hold on to it and have it right next to their ballot. But if they're equal to or more influential, it could be another sign that you kind of don't need a paper edition anymore. People are getting everything they need in terms of endorsements from The Stranger online. On the Herald discussion, just to swoop back to that, The Stranger this year I noticed did not endorse Bruce Harrell, and The Stranger's criticism of Harrell in years past has been, try to think of something that Bruce Harrell has done. Can you? What is it? And so their criticism has been that he's not been a very consequential council member, and so therefore in the past didn't deserve another term. And now, why should he be mayor? And to the extent that you think that's valid, then I think actually one of his strengths could be that no one can pin anything on him, accomplishment or otherwise. And so in this moment when people are mad at the council, a lot of them are, right? And everyone on the council just kind of gets tarred with this, the council sort of label. Well, Bruce isn't on the council anymore. And he was technically mayor for a minute, right? And so he might, in terms of critics of the council, get lumped into not the people with bad council experience, but the outsiders with, who's one of the good guys and maybe has a little executive experience from being mayor. Also, I am very excited to find out what exactly the, what is it? It's, I think, $100,000 worth of dried cherries bought by the Lorena Gonzalez Pro Pack that are coming in the mail. I'm curious to find out how many I get and what they taste like, and what exactly dried cherries have to do with the mayoral election. Here's my theory, and I think it's a pretty good one. Erica, I'm going to put my prediction out there.
Okay.
This one, we'll see if I'm wrong. But Lorena Gonzalez, as anyone who's followed her bio may know, is the daughter of migrant farm workers in Eastern Washington. And the dried cherries, my guess is, tie into her biography. And it's kind of interesting, very tactile way of, God, it's almost like the Eucharist. You're ingesting her biography by eating her dried cherries.
I think it was just a bad ad. Yeah, I think it was just a bad ad by, I mean, honestly, when I watched the ad, which focuses on her childhood as a farm laborer, I sort of stopped listening because there's a long disclaimer at the beginning, and then it didn't make much of an impression on me. So I thought, whatever, that's an ad. And then watched it again. It's not a very good ad. It's from a couple of labor organizations. And I think labor in general is not entirely thrilled with the ad either. So I don't think it's, personally, I don't think it's going to have a lot of impact one way or another, but we'll see. I honestly didn't even absorb that we were getting dried cherries. So I'm excited about that.
Yeah. Maybe you'll feel differently, Erica, after.
Maybe.
Yeah. Okay. I guess if all I'd known was that some candidate was sending around dried cherries, I would think, that sounds like Inslee calling our attention toward climate change. Just look what happened over the last few weeks in cherry crop. I'm sending you our crop. Yes, Kevin.
I just want to, as long as you're talking about weird things in this campaign, I did notice one other weird thing this morning. It sort of comes back to the Stranger for a moment. The Stranger made a couple of endorsements of Seattle School District board candidates. And this morning, Tim Burgess, who many people associate with kind of more sort of moderate center, maybe even conservative in some people's minds, views, political stance in the city, endorsed the same two candidates for the school district board as the Stranger. And, I don't know what happens like supernaturally when that occurred, when the Stranger and Tim Burgess actually agree on something, but, maybe those predictions of no more massive heat waves, yeah, maybe I'm not going to believe those too much, right? We could be seeing some fire and brimstone. God only knows what's going to happen.
Okay, and sorry to belabor this, Bill, but one other quick thing about that, one of those school board endorsements. I know we're getting down to the level of dog catcher here, but not to say that school board is equivalent to that, but these are
just tweeted that.
This is a minor point within one of the lower down endorsements. The Stranger made a very strange comment. I thought that it was. That one of the candidates, Vivian Moritz, has moved out of, does not live in the district and moved into the district, perhaps temporarily, to run for this position. And she is able to do so because her family and she are very wealthy. And the Stranger opined that, well, as long as it's a volunteer position, we're only going to get wealthy people, so whatever. I'm paraphrasing. And, I would say, first of all, that is an odd position for a paper that is ostensibly, aligned with labor and has expressed concerns about the legislature getting paid so little. And B, I think you can look at the current school board and see that it's not all millionaires. So I thought that was a very strange way of brushing aside legitimate concerns about, does the candidate live in the district, and does her financial privilege allow her to just kind of move around at will to run where she wants to.
Okay, we have, I need to pause on elections so we can cover the rest of the week's news. We didn't get a chance to talk about Compassion Seattle, Sawant recall, or King County executive race, or anything outside Seattle, but we will, I promise you. This is the Week in Review, and I'm reviewing the week with Kevin Schofield of Seattle City Council Insight, Eli Sanders of the Wild West newsletter on Substack, and Erica C Barnett, publisher and editor at Publicola. And we're going to come right back and continue figuring out what the heck happened this week. I hope you'll stay tuned.
I'm Paul Henley, host of BBC NewsHour. On today's programme, the latest on the massive floods in Western Europe, and a Canadian Catholic archbishop on why he thinks the Pope should apologise for the historic deaths in Indigenous children's residential schools.
Those stories and a whole lot more. BBC NewsHour begins this afternoon at 1 o'clock.
Support for KUOW comes from Taco Time, family-owned with a focus on locally sourced ingredients and compostable packaging. With 79 locations around the Puget Sound, online ordering is available at tacotimenw.com and on the Taco Time Northwest app.
It is 64 degrees and mostly cloudy in Seattle. Forecast says we'll reach a high today of 68. 94.9 KUOW, Seattle's NPR news station. It's 12:33, and it's KUOW's Week in Review.
I'm your host, Bill Radke. I'm glad you can hear me. You can see me too, and all of my panelists. If you'll go to YouTube or Facebook, search KUOW Public Radio as we bring you the Week in Review. So ever since the Seattle Police Department bugged out of their Capitol Hill precinct building during last summer's protests, we've been asking who made that decision. It matters because the city's being sued for not protecting people and property, and because of political intrigue, and because the people of Seattle might like to know who's making big decisions and why. The text messages of the mayor, police chief, and fire chief have mysteriously gone missing. But this week, KUOW reported that the person who made that call to leave the East Precinct was Assistant Chief Tom Mahaffey. Kevin, is that surprising? Is that important? No.
Is it surprising? So it's certainly important. I think without a doubt, it's important. And I think one of the big questions that we still don't have an answer to, and the KUOW story hinted at a couple of places, but didn't really kind of dive into, was did Chief of Police at the time, Carmen Best, and Mayor Durkin know that it was Mahaffey? How much, if anything, did they know about this? It sounds like from the story and from other things that I've heard, and I imagine Eric and Eli have heard too, that Best in particular, and possibly Durkin, generally didn't know it was Mahaffey and were out of the loop on what was going on. And I've heard through off the record comments from folks that this is one of multiple instances of Carmen Best being cut out of the loop by her command staff, right? And you could even potentially call it a slow-moving mutiny. In fact, that there was real resistance to her among her command staff, and they were undermining her in several ways. I think, and that's certainly extremely important and very disturbing if it really turns out to be true.
It would also wildly recast the national reputation that Best created for herself after all the Capitol Hill occupied protest consternation on Fox News and so on, and here in Seattle, where she became the police chief who was willing to stand up to the liberal mob and was leading a tough department. But if it turns out that her department leaders were mutinying against her, that doesn't really support the idea of a great and heroic and widely loved by the police chief of police.
Yeah, I think, the situation that KUOW did such a great job reporting on during the hours and days of those protests really speaks to a larger cultural issue. So we can talk about Mahaffey, but I don't think any Mahaffey in any department exists in isolation. And I think that, Best is gone. And Durkin's about to be gone. And so the question looking forward is, what does this say about the culture of the Seattle Police Department? And the fact that, people went along with this, they didn't say, what are you talking about, dude? Says to me, we have a culture of, a culture that certainly did not respect the protesters and thought of them as, an angry, unruly mob, or thought of them as somebody that was the police department's enemy, full stop. And, I don't think these are like surprising revelations, but I think that that it speaks to just kind of the problem with goes all the way into, the heart of the culture at SPD. And so, whether you discipline one officer, you discipline, a handful of officers, the issue is the culture, and the culture that made it possible for an officer to give this order and for other officers to obey and abandon the East Precinct.
I don't know whether we have answers to these, but I just have many questions about why commanders would want to undermine the police chief, how they could get away with it. How could you keep that kind of thing a secret about who told who in an entire department? You can just refuse to answer the question. How could this assistant chief keep his job? I don't even know if those are relevant, but I'm mystified now. What could be going on in the Seattle Police Department?
Well, I think to Erica's point, it speaks to a much larger issue about the culture within the department, right? That they are, there is a culture of protecting each other and, if necessary, hiding what's going on. I will say my one bone that I have to pick with the KOW story is they said they had 2,000 pages of public records and they shared essentially none of them with the story, right? They gave a very detailed narrative of here are all the things that happened. And apparently they had all this evidence, but they didn't actually release any of it with the story. And I would love to read that so I can sort of see with my own eyes that the detailed, meticulous narrative that they laid out, which really, accuses Mahaffey and some other folks of specific actions, was sort of backed up with some evidence. But assuming that
I know from the reporter Isolde that that's a matter of protecting sources, as you could well.
They said it was public records. It's all public records. They don't have sources to protect without. So, but assuming the narrative is in fact true, again, it comes back to the point Erica made that we still have issues in mid 2021 about the culture within that department that need to seriously be addressed.
Okay, well, my other question has to do with, I mentioned that these text messages from the mayor and police chief and fire chief that could be relevant here mysteriously went missing. First of all, is that anyone think that's inaccurate, or would you call it a mystery?
I think it's still a mystery how the mayor's phone and a couple other officials' phones got set so that they weren't archiving messages, and we may never get a specific answer to that. I hope we do get an answer to that. I mean, that was
well. News organizations have sued the city, saying it broke the state's public records law. This week, the Seattle Times reported that the city has countersued the Times. But Kevin, you think that's false?
Yeah, that is not accurate. That is not accurate. The city
know about what's really going on.
Yeah, so the city, officially has to respond when they get sued as the Seattle Times, and the Seattle Times raises, a ton of, important and sort of well documented, allegations in this. And what the city did is, in the response that they had to file with the court, they asked the court to proactively declare that they had not violated any laws and had not done anything wrong. And in legal terms, that's called a counterclaim that was written into their response in the suit. They didn't make any allegations about Seattle Times. They didn't accuse anybody else of any wrongdoing. They didn't file any charges. And the only two things they asked for was statement from the court that they didn't do anything wrong, and to have their legal fees paid if they win. And quite frankly, even if they hadn't asked for the counterclaim, if they won the lawsuit from Seattle Times, they get their legal fees paid by the Seattle Times anyway.
The counterclaim, I mean, I'm going to push back on that a little bit. The counterclaim is not the exact same thing as a response to a lawsuit. Those are, I mean, I've probably spoken to some of the same people you have at the city, Kevin, and a ruling that they didn't do anything wrong on, I can't remember how many, specific points they denied, but it was dozens. If the court were to rule and establish case law that the city did nothing wrong, that would be an incredibly broad thing, an incredibly broad action that would effectively exonerate the city. And so it is more than just a standard, they have to respond. It is substantive. And
so let me just be clear. You're right. You're absolutely right. I wasn't trying to imply that, this is just a normal thing. They asked for a lot in asking for this declaration, and they probably won't get it, right? Because I think the evidence is pretty clear that they did a bunch of things wrong. But they're not countersuing, right? They're not alleging that Seattle Times did anything wrong. They're not making any allegations about reporters doing anything wrong. They're asking for something that is.
So are you, Kevin, are you saying, I'm just trying to parse what you're saying here. It sounds like what you're saying is that you, Kevin, feel like the Seattle Times is playing a very loud, victim violin where they shouldn't be. Is that what you're saying?
I'm not gonna ascribe, intent to them. I think their headline that this is a countersuit is inaccurate and misleading.
If I can finish my point, I was going to say, I think this sort of semantic argument about whether it's a counterclaim or a countersuit is really probably interesting to lawyers and insiders. But I think that, the bottom line question is, was this an aggressive act by the city of, essentially defending, yes, other actors in the city, but specifically the mayor and her lawyer. And the city can take an aggressive stance or it can take a not aggressive stance. And the city attorney has chosen to take a pretty aggressive stance in saying that Mayor Durkin and her lawyer, Michelle Chin, did nothing wrong. And I think that they did do something wrong. And the wrong thing that they did, the specifics of it, we do not currently know, but public records were withheld from reporters. And I have a stake in this because, many of those requests, 5 of them in the lawsuit, in the report on which the lawsuit is based. The lawsuit is just on behalf of Seattle Times reporters, but 5 of those records or requests were for me. And routinely, I don't get texts from the city and from the mayor's office. And I think that there is ample evidence that there was a deliberate action to withhold those texts by somebody at some point. And so the point of the lawsuit is to find out how that happened and who's to blame. And I think that the city deciding to make a counterclaim against Seattle Times is, it is an act of aggression whether you say, oh, they're not charging the Times with wrongdoing in itself, which would be highly, highly unusual. And they're not making, they're not alleging that the Seattle Times somehow violated the law. Again, that would be highly unusual. They're making a counterclaim, which is itself unusual.
And you can see the potential value of getting a positive ruling on that counterclaim to Mayor Durkin. She would love nothing better than to be able to walk away from this lawsuit, although it will probably outlast her tenure as mayor, but come out of the lawsuit, I guess, being able to say, see, a court said we did everything right. I would imagine, especially given Durkin's past as a lawyer, that is what she sees as the end goal of this counterclaim or countersuit, however you cast it.
Okay, so that's the latest on the back and forth about these texts and transparency around the precinct question. My job is to keep us rolling on some of the big news of the week. So I want to get at some of what's underlying all of this, which has to do with police reform. There was a big development this week. A new state Supreme Court ruling came through that affects the way families of people killed by police can get answers and accountability. For example, Tanya Isabel is the cousin of Charlena Lyles, who was killed by Seattle police 4 years ago. And here she is praising the state Supreme Court for its ruling.
They made a decision based on the needs of families and people affected by this. So only thing I can say right now is this has been a long fight, but I'm excited and I'm just joyful right now.
Eli, why you've said that this is a big deal, this ruling. Why is that?
Well, you can go into it this way. There is no shortage of talk, particularly in Seattle right now, about the really dire need to address systemic this and institutional that, right? This is a ruling that does exactly that. We had a system in place that had been, institutionalized over decades for doing inquests into police killings that was a joke. And that is almost literally the Seattle Times reporting on it today or yesterday when the story came out about the Supreme Court ruling that the inquest process had become laughable, in the sense that it's not funny to the families of people who have been killed, but in the sense that it was not a serious process devoted to finding out whether police had acted wrongfully or criminally. And the state Supreme Court in this ruling overturned a King County judge who had thrown out essentially King County Executive Dow Constantine's reforms to the inquest process. The Supreme Court came back in and said, no, all of Constantine's reforms to this process stay, and it sounds like they kind of added a thing or two of their own. And so now, for example, the police will have to testify and will have to, at these inquests, and will have to answer questions that lead or that proceed down a road of inquiry directed at figuring out whether they violated the law, whether they acted criminally in taking someone's life. And the fact that this didn't happen before is a huge problem. The fact that it is now going to happen by state Supreme Court order, not just in Seattle, but potentially elsewhere, is a very, very big deal. There will be a huge backlog now of these cases because they were on pause while this wound its way through the courts. But once that's resolved, it will really, really dramatically change the way that Seattle deals with police killings, and I think for the better, change the sense of justice that families of people who are killed feel in terms of the way the process plays out.
Yeah. So just a couple of clarifications on Constantine's executive order and what the Supreme Court did. The Supreme Court did actually overrule a couple of pretty major things that were in Dow Constantine's executive order laying out the new rules for inquests. Constantine had said that police officers involved in a killing somebody did not in fact have to testify, right? He said that the inquest could not subpoena them, and the Supreme Court overturned that. The part of state law the Supreme Court cited that had never really been cited in this way before said that inquests need to hear from every person who has knowledge of the facts, right? And they said there's no exceptions. The law says every person, and that includes police officers. He also gave the police officers something out of this because Constantine had said that one of the issues that happens in a lot of inquests is the police officers come in and they testify that they were fearing for their life when this incident happened and they shot and killed somebody, and that tended to get them off the hook, at least in the court of public opinion, if not in the inquest itself. And so he put in a rule that said that police officers could not testify as to their mental state during an incident. And the Supreme Court said, no, they absolutely can testify about that. You know, their sort of big push that they tried to get in the Supreme Court ruling was to say the inquest listens to everyone. They get to hear from everyone, and they get to hear all the facts and all the evidence. And so, you know, it was a little bit for everybody. It was a little bit for the families. It was a little bit for the police officers, a little bit for the cities. Everybody wanted a little bit of this. But the big theme was, no, let's open this up so the inquest really gets to hear from everybody and hear everything.
I don't really have anything to add. I mean, those are great summaries. I do, you know, I think that what will be most, the measure of success of this process, I mean, obviously transparency itself is a win, and for, you know, people who want more police accountability and for the families, as is, you know, requiring officers to testify. Now, of course, they can still plead their Fifth Amendment rights, but the test will be, you know, what are the consequences for officers ultimately? That's sort of the larger public policy question is, you know, will officers be charged with crimes, and will they ultimately lose their jobs after killing civilians in the line of duty? And so I think that's, you know, that's going to take years to play out, and we'll be able to judge then. But this is definitely, you know, an important first step in that process.
Yeah, Erica makes some great points. The Supreme Court also said very clearly that Dow Constantine has the right to open up inquest to the public. Right. And that the inquest can look at whether there were criminal means used in the police shooting, and that it doesn't turn into a criminal trial. That doesn't mean they're going to convict police officers, but what it means is that if they find that there were criminal means, that automatically becomes probable cause for the King County prosecuting attorney to file a criminal case against a police officer. They doesn't need to do any more work. That's it. That's enough probable cause to get a case filed.
Okay, very good. That's a state Supreme Court ruling just come down this week. We are catching the big news stories of the week and explaining them to you, as we do on the Week in Review with Kevin Schofield and Eli Sanders and Erica C Barnett. We're just about at the end of our show. I'm Bill Radke. We're going to take a quick break and hit another story if we can, and give each other a reason to smile. I hope you will stay tuned.
Support for KUOW comes from the law firm of Miller Nash. New name and website with the same commitment to serving the legal needs of businesses and communities throughout the Pacific Northwest. More info at their new website at millernash.com. And from the Washington State Department of Licensing. Renewing a driver's license or ID card online can be done from anywhere at any time. Information on how to renew a driver's license or ID card online at dol.wa.gov/renew-and-go.
64 degrees in Seattle. 68 is today's expected high. It's 6 minutes till 1 o'clock. This is 94.9 KUOW, Seattle's NPR news station. And this is KUOW's Week in Review.
I'm Bill Radke. Before we get to a reason to smile at the end of another week, one more news item, maybe quickly. It's been a tough year or so. Lethal virus, now more wildfires. Hopefully all of these problems will inspire us to pull together and find new creative solutions.
Free-falling Lime scooters, jump bicycles crushing Teslas, chunks of rock blowing out windows, even rebar harpooning a windshield. These are just a handful of horrific incidents among the now 161 reported cases of debris being launched into King County roadways in recent months.
Great. Rocks, rebar, scooters, bicycles, also shopping carts and propane tanks. Does anybody have any theory as to why this is happening? 161 incidents?
I mean, my guess is that it's a finite number of individuals who are throwing a lot of stuff off of a few bridges. I mean, that is just the most likely thing, rather than it being like an epidemic. Somebody, there's a possibility too of copycat crimes, and I'll say that is because of this, really intense media coverage that I was not aware of until I started looking. The Tacoma News Tribune called it a form of traffic terrorism that conjures memories of the Beltway sniper rampage of 2002. And I'll just point out that a lot more people, 0 people have died in these incidents. 24 people died in traffic in Seattle last year alone.
Yeah. You were saying?
I can't even begin to speculate as to why people are doing this. But for me, this sort of thing, there's always, a tendency to kind of fall prey to the tyranny of the one thing. There must be one reason why people are doing this, and I haven't seen evidence that there is sort of one reason. It could be a whole bunch of things. It could be, some of the things that Erica raised. I think she makes some good points about that. Could be some amount of copycat in it. Could be, some people just traumatized from the last 18 months and lashing out in some ways from everything that's happened to our society over the last 18 months and here in Seattle. I'm not sure it's one thing.
Yeah.
I agree, I think, directly or tangentially with what Erica was saying, which is that the coverage of this could actually be contributing to more of it, in the sense that it's a relatively small in the scheme of things phenomenon that as more people find out about it, maybe more people with, destructive impulses want to copy. It's a cowardly and dangerous act, no matter how many people are doing it. And there may be enough people out there that the more we, fret about it, the more some people with unfocused rage and destructive impulses say, okay, I want to join that really bad club.
Okay, let's talk about something else. Good idea. We got 2 minutes left. Any reason to smile this week?
I can't even really talk about this without getting screamed at by people for spoiling a show. So I won't say anything detailed, except that Loki is renewed for season 2, and there is a delightful, I think frustrating to some others online that I've seen, cliffhanger at the very end of the first season of that show. So that's Loki on Disney.
Oh, now I know there's a cliffhanger.
Shocker.
I will say I loved the show up until the season finale. But I'm glad. I was super disappointed in the season finale. We'll give no spoilers, but I'm glad it's renewed. I'm looking
too much exposition. Okay, I've said too much.
I'm not even gonna go there. What's making me smile this week is a couple weeks ago I got to visit my parents who are in their 80s in Northern California, and I got to give my mom a hug for the first time in 18 months. In fact, I gave her probably 18 months worth of hugs over the course of like 3 days, and that's still making me smile.
That's good stuff. Eli?
Ooh, mine is smiling at someone else's bad day, so it's really different than Kevin's, which was beautiful. But mine is beautiful also. So for all of you who were really upset that all the people pushing the big lie about the election just seemed to get away with it and get away with it and get away with it, this week in a Michigan court in front of a federal judge, Sidney Powell and Lynn Wood, the Kraken lawyers who pushed the really false conspiracies about a stolen election in court and submitted these bogus false affidavits to courts, which then that submission of evidence, in quotation marks because it was really shoddy evidence, got used by conservative media to pump up the big lie even more. They got called in front of a federal judge who can potentially, and seems like she's going to sanction them, maybe recommend proceedings to strip them of their law license and so on. So it made me smile to see these people actually have to explain themselves and maybe face consequences.
You got a fist pump from Kevin. I'm completely out of time, so I'm just going to smile at the fact that you come around and share knowledge with us. I love to see you, and our listeners love to hear you. Erica C. Barnett from Publicola, Kevin Schofield, Seattle City Council Insight, Eli Sanders, Wild West Newsletter. Thank you, everybody. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Bill.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks to Tio Popescu and Juan Pablo Chiquiza for social media and live streaming. And thank you to Sarah Leibovitz and Alec Cowan for producing the show. I'm Bill Radke.